So thank you very much. Thank you very much for your paper. And as your paper was the very last paper in this panel, we can open a discussion. Before that, let me remind you that you can either write your questions into chat, or you can raise your hand electronically, of course. And then we will ask you to present your question in person. So we have plenty of time for discussion. So if you have any question, you're welcome to ask.
I have one.
Yeah, Gabriela, please.
Sorry. Hello, thank you for all this.
So could you speak?
Yes, I will speak.
Yes, now I can hear you. Okay, thank you.
It's okay. Thank you for all this paper. And I wanted first to ask a question to Alan Coffey. And then this question could be generalized because it raises methodological point of view and questions. The question was to know, I don't know nothing about Catherine Macaulay. We almost begin to know Mary Wollstonecraft in France. You know, it's beginning to be traducted, but Catherine Macaulay, it's a little early. Is there a link between her practice of history and the place of women in republicanism? You didn't mention it. Maybe I miss it, but I think you didn't mention it. I was interested in this. And more generally, I wanted to ask the question to, so sorry for the pronunciation, Mr. Toes, I don't know, and Mr. Halanka. It seems that republicanism is more difficult to treat about, to think about without conveying or mobilizing historical science than liberalism, for instance. Is it specific to republicanism not to be able to be thought about without the help of social science? And of course, for Mr. Toth, it's a bit different because you didn't mention it, but I'm asking you this question. So I've finished.
Okay, I mean, shall I take the first one, or do Tomasz and Janos want to? I'll take the first one. Yeah. Okay. Thank you. That's an excellent question. Yes, I'm not surprised that few people are familiar with Catherine Macaulay. Her works are not available in English either. I mean, that you can download facsimiles from specialist websites, but they're not published in our time. Just this year, Karen Green, a sort of feminist philosopher, published Macaulay's edited, complete correspondence. So her letters are now available for the first time, but not her actual substantive philosophical work. So there's a long way to go. Yes, so that's an excellent question about the place of women historically in republicanism. And I take it you mean that they were the property of men, that they had no civil standing in their own right, they didn't participate publicly and that sort of thing. Macaulay doesn't really address this at all in her work, and this has been something of a sort of problem for feminists. A couple of times she says a few unhelpful things. She does a sketch for the Constitution of Corsica. So the Corsicans they were rebelling against French rule, and she proposed a draft constitution, and it stipulated that inheritance would go to men only, and these kind of things. So feminists were often not impressed by this. Nevertheless, by the end of her career and her letters on education, you do see a clear understanding of the dangers and the nature of women's dependence, and she's clearly arguing for independence, but she stops short herself of articulating a case for or a demand for equal citizenship, equal rights, political participation, anything like that. That's all for someone like Wollstonecraft to take up. But she does lay the foundations, and she does, I think, a lot of very sort of important conceptual work, particularly, as I mentioned, in this sort of critique of patriarchal power along the lines of the royal prerogative. So she critiques arbitrary power in any form, and she particularly uses the model of monarchy as the kind of exemplar. And then she quite explicitly translates that into the domestic sphere. So you can see the conceptual connection being made. She also, in her history, in contrast to someone like, well, particularly Hume, takes seriously women as actors. She foregrounds their role. She includes their speeches. She doesn't patronize or satirize them the way Hume does. She shows them both behind the scenes and actually petitioning and making genuine kind of reasoned arguments. And so she places women in a sort of active role historically. And so, you know, her very act of, you know, participating as an equal, a feared sort of opponent in the political sphere as well. So she does a lot in her life and in the style of her writings that changes or challenges that question of women's place in Republican theory. Certainly virtue, she insists, has to be rational, and therefore applies to both. There's not separate virtues for men and women. That was Rousseau's view, and she ridicules that, as famously Wollstonecraft took it up, but it was Macaulay's argument first. So she does a lot of the conceptual work, but she does stop short of making these demands herself. If that, I hope that's not too long-winded an answer, but yeah. Thank you.
Okay, thank you for the answer. And I think there was a second question for Szilárd and Tomáš. So if you would like to answer, maybe Szilárd, if you would like to answer first.
Yeah, sure. Sure. Yeah. So I mean, no. I mean, my response is that of course you don't necessarily need the history. I mean, you know, you can separate the. Yeah, I mean, this, what I was talking about as well was questions of political philosophy. I mean, these don't necessarily have to be related to the history. So no, I don't think so. In fact, you know, in contemporary discourse, these positions which are labeled as neo-Roman, say, or neo-Athenian or whatever, these are, you know, coherent and systematized to a degree to which, you know, the historical sources never are. They're always way more ambiguous and everything. So these are contemporary constructions, you know. So yeah, that's what I think.
Okay, so Tomáš, would you like to add something?
Yes. Well, to the question of role of history, right, in republicanism.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think we can invoke here the notion of tradition, as it's elaborated in a hermeneutical philosophy in Heidegger or Gadamer, that we always live in some sort of tradition, which is important of how we think about ourselves, about our political reality. So I think, and scholars on ideologies like Andrew Haywood or Michael Frieden, I then each ideology needs to have some sense of interpretation of history and of future vision. So it's history, I think, is important in all political theories, in all ideologies. And for example, even liberalism has it. So the meta-narrative of liberalism, I think, probably is that it wants to liberate someone, to liberate sort of everybody from coercive social relations they didn't choose. So it's also then liberalism. But I think you are quite right in your perception that in republicanism, this is way more important than in some of the other ideologies, and I think it's more important than in liberalism. At least it's stressed way more often than in case of liberalism. I might have a hunch why, but I'm not too sure about the reason myself. But first thought from me would be that if you take a look at classical republicanism, that was republicanism constituting itself in an intentional follow-up to antiquity. So they thought that there's this new age which is coming back to this old age and sort of like reviving these themes. And I think liberalism did not really at any point was thinking about itself at this way. They wanted to bring something entirely new, but in sort of like a Republican perception is the notion of coming back to the antiquity all the time. And so I think it might be, and even today, Quentin Skinner-Philip, Michael Sander, they are still inspired in antiquity, not only, but they are still invoking it. So I think that might be the reason.
Thank you.
Okay,
I think they are interested in the practices, political practices that that show. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so, thank you for the question and the answers. I see there are two more questions by Rudmer and Jan. I think you, Rudmer, was the first one. So Rudmer, please, you have time for a question.
Yes. Okay. Thanks for these stimulating talks. I hope you can all hear me. Yeah, my question has actually been partly answered by, it was for Ellen actually. It's about the relation between Macaulay and Hume, in particular how she perhaps reacts to Hume in her history of England. So in Hume, you might say there's still some remote echo of the Republican tradition, but Macaulay is more strongly Republican. So I was wondering, how does she explicitly react to Hume's reading of the history of England in her own history of England? And what is her Republican critique of Hume, if there is such a critique in her work? Okay.
Yes, that's excellent. And that's an important question. She very much does react to Hume, and they're sort of on opposite sides of the sort of political divide at the time. I mean, these days people tend to see Hume in slightly more enlightened liberal terms. I think, particularly, that converges with contemporary sort of sensibilities, and Hume is an important Enlightenment philosopher, so we see him, and this is through a sort of 19th century lens, in his more sort of liberal focus. But certainly Macaulay is reacting to his sort of more Tory, more pro-monarchist sort of defences. So, he didn't approve of the execution of Charles I. He was he rooted the rights of the people in tradition rather than in principle. So Macaulay is very much in sort of Edmund Burke's terms, a systematic and speculative philosopher. She grounds everything in principle. In fact, there's only one principle, which is freedom. And this is based on immutable truths that we can know from abstract reasoning, natural theology, and this kind of thing. And she was sort of mocked in her day for reducing everything to the single question of freedom, but also there was a sort of respect that actually this was driving forward the case for sort of more liberty. And so she thinks that Hume is playing into the hands of the king, of the aristocracy, of the oligarchs, of the powerful, and so that so privately they only exchanged one set of letters that I'm aware of that survives. But Hume wrote to Macaulay, thanking her for her critique of his work, and he said that he thought that they didn't really differ that much, except maybe in tone, because they both wanted liberty, they both wanted all this sort of thing. But Macaulay writes back quite sharply. She's gracious, but she's firm. She says, "No, I stand on principle, and you have a very, very shaky grounds that is liable to be usurped by those in power." And be manipulated by the king, and so it's next to useless. It might seem, this idea that Quentin talked about yesterday about this has got to be secure and robust. All Republicans know that we look at resilience, and that's her point. Hume isn't resilient. He plays into the hands of the powerful. So I think that's where they differ mostly. I don't know if that makes sense, but Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, okay, thanks. Yeah, that's very clear. Interesting. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, thank you for the question and the answer. And I think now it's time for Jan Buran's question.
Good morning. I'm Jan Buran, Palacký University, Olomouc. I thank you all for wonderful wonderful presentations. I have 2 points to Dr. Todd's presentation. 2 points. The first one is that I see at least 2 reasons why neo-Roman republicanism is not liberalism in disguise, and both were actually mentioned by Quentin Skinner yesterday. The first is that neo-Roman republicans don't believe in natural rights. The second is that there exists in their thinking an essential connection between democracy and freedom. One is simply not free if one doesn't live under a democratic constitution, which doesn't hold for republicanism, for liberalism, sorry, although there is like a certain, like, coincidence of those. And the second point is that there was the question put in the presentation whether the people will actually make the moral and rational decisions. And I think that both neo-Romans and arguably even, the neo-Athenians and arguably even the neo-Romans would answer that putting the question like this is already loaded with paternalism, and they just don't buy the question.
Okay. May I respond?
Yes, of course.
Yeah. So I wasn't trying to say that neo-Roman theory is, as a whole, liberalism is in disguise. What I was trying to say, so I mean, your point about natural right is fine. I mean, what I was trying to say that it's neo-Roman democratic theory. Okay, so the neo-Roman theory of democracy that is essentially liberalism in disguise. And this point that you made about the essential connection between freedom and democracy that's allegedly not there in liberalism, I said something about this specifically. Yes, it's true. Like Isaiah Berlin famously says that the essential connection is not there between non-interference and democracy. That's true, but it's not true. But liberal theorists have been, they're very clear that the enjoyment of the value of freedom, right? Rawls says this very clearly. Well, there is a connection there. Okay, so yeah, I mean, you don't need it for non-interference itself, but if you really want to enjoy the value of non-interference, then you're going to need democracy. I mean, the liberals are pretty, clear about this. Well, as for your second point, will the majority choose wisely? I mean, look at the work of John McCormick, for instance. I mean, this is something that he very explicitly deals with. This is not. You could say that it's loaded with paternalism. That will the majority choose wisely or not? You might argue that, but I definitely wouldn't say that neo-Romans would say that this is so. I mean, what's the point of all the counter-majoritarian institutions if not this? This is the whole point of them, and this is where they're in agreement with liberals. Is that if you let the democratic principle prevail in more and more areas of life, and even in questions concerning basic rights, then that's trouble. So that's the whole point of these institutions. I don't think any neo-Roman would say that this is. Yeah, maybe there is paternalism in this, but it's not wrong. I mean, that's the morally right response, the political response. I think, or anyway, that's the view that follows from their position, I think. Yeah.
Okay, it seems that Jan Buran wants to take a follow-up, if I'm right.
Yeah, thank you. Well, okay. I would say that the reason for separation of powers and checks and balances in neo-Roman republicanism is to secure freedom as non-domination and not to make people making rational decisions.
Okay.
Well, yeah, I mean, yes, of course, it's but I mean, part of what non-domination is, you know, in the neo-Roman position is that you enjoy rights. I mean, and what if the majority wants to push through a decision that would constrain certain basic rights or whatever? I mean, that's what the issue is about. I mean, these counter-majoritarian. I mean, I really don't see a way out there. You know, I mean, you either want these institutions or you don't want these institutions. You know, if you really, you know, if you're a genuine populist, then you're going to say, not so much, you know, and that's because of the optimism or pessimism that you share about how the majority is going to choose. You know, that's what McCormick is saying for his part as well. You know, well, I mean, you know, there's a distrust in the people. So, quote unquote, in Petit's theory. Yeah, maybe, I don't know.
Okay, thank you very much. It seems we have several questions. So now I'm going to ask Jan Květina to present this question.
Thank you, Jan. I'm sorry, I explained it already yesterday that I'm not allowed to raise the hand in the discussion. So, well, the only way to take part is to write secretly or privately to the host. So sorry, Nikolai, I'm not overtaking you. Well, I would like to ask Evangelos, if you are here. Thank you first for your detailed analysis of the Richard Price's contribution to the theory of republicanism. But I was just wondering whether you would agree with the, well, traditional interpretation of the language discourse of republicanism as a transfer of some kind of early modern heritage, as for example, John Pocock claims. So whether you would agree that Richard Price's contribution to the discourse, language discourse of republicanism was mainly inherited from the discourse of the English Civil War.
So if I understand, there are two questions. The first one is concerns the origins or the sources of Richard Price's theory, and the second one is concerning the general statements of Pocock on the existence of a language of republicanism in early modern Europe. So I do not feel qualified to make any general statements for the whole time from the 11th century until the 19th century, which is the area occupied in the Machiavellian moment. So I will just restrict myself to the first question concerning the origins of Price's view. So I would say that there is a combination of two different sources. One is a tradition of Protestant natural law, which evolves in the notion of natural law evolves into what we call natural rights, and this happens during this period of the long 18th century, and Price is definitely drawing from this tradition, let's say. And the other important source for these arguments is the common discourse about liberty, which is everywhere in all the pamphlet literature that has been produced in the years preceding his publications. I mean, the debate on the American policy of the ministry is conducted on these terms even before Price publishes his own pamphlets. So it is not that he's making an original contribution in the sense that he's changing the terms of the discussion. However, he is taking a novel position. This is what this novel about. I don't know.
Thank you.
All right.
Okay, so as it's already been announced, now it's time for Nikolai's question.
Okay, thank you. I actually have a question for all the speakers. I would like to hear your reflections on the relation between republicanism and then economic relations, or the social question, so to speak. Because it seems to me, at least, that this is where perhaps liberalism and republicanism are quite different. So you spoke about low maintenance costs of liberalism, and it seems fine for liberal that people vote every 4th year or so. But it seems to me that republicanism has a higher standard for political participation. But that also quickly means that you need to change economic and social relations so that people can participate. So that they have time for participation. There are institutions set up so that they can participate, but perhaps also that there need, the kind of domination that goes on in the workplace, it would not be acceptable for a Republican, whereas it would be for liberal. And I also came to think about it because of Alan Coffey spoke a little bit about the communitarian aspects of republicanism, and especially perhaps female Republicans being aware of more communitarian aspects. So if all people are to participate in some form, well, then you need social reform within the family relations or at the workplace and so on. Well, I was just curious how you see this relation between, let's say, economic relation or the social question and then republicanism from the various perspectives that all 4 of you have been speaking from. Thank you.
Okay, so thank you very much for the question. I think it's a kind of a follow-up on Gabriel's question. So because all the panelists you will ask to answer, so if any one of you wants to answer, I think Sila to raise his hand as a first. So Sila,
I raised my hand originally because I had a question for Tomáš, which I would like to ask a bit later. But let me just briefly respond to this. So the social and so there's been a pretty big body of literature produced in recent years on this issue, and of course the prevailing project now is this leftist project which aims to look at, on the one hand, the historical record, but also on the normative level how there's this assumption that while liberalism is by nature somehow closer to pro-market policies and that sort of thing, republicanism is somehow by nature closer to social democratic policies, redistribution, or even the more radical streams on the left, like socialism or even anarchistic versions of republicanism and whatever. And I think that there is something to that, but I mean there's other bodies of literature. So you might want to check out Sean Irving's work, for instance, on how it's very easy to read Hayek as a Republican as well, and I think he's absolutely right in a way. So the thing that there's this abstract idea in republicanism about you want to make society freer, you want to reduce domination and blah blah blah, and then you think about the institutional implications of this very abstract ideal. And one possible conclusion that you can draw from it is, well, I mean, the best institutions that bring this about are, progressive policies. But this is not the only, conclusion that you can draw from it. I mean, a pro-market policy can just as easily be drawn from this theoretical framework, precisely because the ideals are so abstract. I mean, it's not clear at all, in my view, what the economic institutional implications of non-domination are. Partially because the empirical evidence itself is so ambiguous. I mean, it's not. That's the underlying reason why these pro-market republicanisms can be just as consistent, So I think that this story that Stuart White, for example, argues that republicanism is somehow on the left and liberalism is closer to the right. I mean, that's just I don't buy that at all. I think that both of these theories are highly ambiguous, and various institutional implications can be drawn from them. I mean, neither is closer to socialistic ideals than the other. I think that's absolutely wrong to assume that would be the case.
Okay, thank you. If I'm right, I saw Evangelos raising his hand.
Yes, I was wondering if I could supply an answer to Nikolai's question by drawing his attention to the historical record. And there are 2 points to be made, which I agree with what Szilárd said, i.e. that in pre-modern republicanism, there is, of course, a strain of thought that has been excavated by Eric Nelson, who has pointed out that a particular conceptualization of the notion of justice and liberty led the Roman part of the tradition to negate the necessity or the desirability for any kind of market redistribution of material resources. On the other hand, a very different Platonic idea or Aristotelian idea of justice as the just ordering of the parts of the whole of civil society led other Republican theorists like Harrington or the founders, the American founders, or Mably in France, to advocate an egalitarian distribution of land, the basic material resource. And this is one thing, that in pre-modern republicanism, there are both defenders and opponents of the redistribution of material resources. The other thing is, in modernity, Quentin Skinner has many times drawn attention to how the labor movement of the 19th century, in particular Karl Marx himself, have drawn upon this vocabulary and the notions of Republican liberty to criticize the condition of wage laborers in a commercial society. So it is of course possible, and it has been articulated in the past, a critique of capitalism or commercial relations with Republican liberty as a means to articulating this critique. And I think there is a lot of work that has been done on the history of these notions in the 19th century. In particular, Julia Nichols at King's has worked on how the communards were working with these notions of the Republican tradition. So.
Okay, thank you. I think I saw Alan raising his hand, so if you want to add something.
Yeah, just very quickly. My own view on this economic sort of question. I mean, I'm not going to speak for the actual policies, whether they're pro-market or whatever. But my sort of sense certainly from the 18th century writers is that a very, very high standard of equality is demanded, and that's equality across different sort of dimensions. So economic independence, and this is why I prefer independence than to domination. Dependence of any sort is sort of antithetical to liberty. So it's no point being legally free or politically free if you're not also economically free. If you're economically free but you have no political rights, that's no use either. If you're both economic and politically free but you have no social standing, that's no good either. So you need a sort of combination of them all, and they tend to leak into each other if so if you disenfranchise a section of the population politically, then that also has an impact on their social standing and on their economic independence. If you marginalize a group of people economically, that affects their effectiveness of their political rights and so on. So these things are all interconnected, and the bar is high. Certainly Macaulay, but many others are talking about, so beware of inequality, because economic inequality. First of all, the super rich can buy us all off, circumvent the powers, but also it sends a sort of disuniting message to the population. So rather than encouraging sort of the common good and benevolence and all these sort of things, it sort of polarizes and disincentivizes people. So to my understanding, it's not really the question of economics on its own, but this wider question of a high standard of independence across all the social spheres, and that I think is very demanding. I have to say, I think Republicans struggle to live up to that. It's just personal view. Yeah.
Can I just say something very quickly?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Just because Tomáš Halanka wanted to add something, so then I will give you space. So
thank you. Thank you. Well, one thing I forgot to mention to my graph is that all these concepts really undergo a huge conceptual shift in the history, and one of these concepts, which is relevant to your question, is the concept of equality. So if we take a look at what equality meant for Cicero in economic terms, right, and what it means nowadays for Philippe Petit or Marcus Sandel, it's somewhere in totally different dimension, right? So I think this question was really developing in the history of Republican political thought quite a lot, and really get into to closer to what I think you mean was really only in the 19th century. I think the notion of wage slavery was very well noted here before by Engels, and I think this is perhaps the only thing. Philip Petit is really inspired by Michael Sandel by his discussion of these topics. So today, I think especially for Philip Petit, I think this question is very important. What he would like to do in his version of republicanism, in my reading, is to really provide a robust protection against non-domination. It means more robust than in liberalism. Of course, in liberalism we have to distinguish which sort of liberalism we mean. It for sure would be way more protection than in sort of libertarian or neoliberal liberalism. But as, for example, Michael Frieden points out, if you compare republicanism, especially 19th century republicanism, to liberalism of, for example, T.H. Green and some other people, perhaps there the difference of republicanism and liberalism on social question is not that different. So I think to conclude that for republicanism, like if we take it as a tradition developing in time, it has increasingly more and more importance.
Okay, Tomasz, thank you very much for and all other presenters for the response. We have now some more questions. So if you want to continue in the discussion on this topic on to answer this question, maybe we can return to later in the discussion. Now we have a kind of mutual question from Tomasz to Szilárd, and then question from Szilárd to Tomasz. So I'll ask Tomasz to present his question to Szilárd.
Thank you. So in your view, does the neo-Roman theory of democracy, right, have any like a really substantial independent value which wouldn't already be included in liberalism?
So do I think that neo-Roman democratic theory is distinguishable from liberalism?
Well, yeah, or if you think if it brings something really like substantial, which liberalism doesn't offer.
I think no. I think what it does is it reframes the issue in a new conceptual framework. I don't think that substantially it's really, you know, different. No.
Thanks.
Okay, Szilárd, yeah. Now it's your turn.
Yeah, and I have a question for you, which is, so I like your presentation, and I don't really know I'm not a historian either, so I can't speak to that. But as for the normative, you know, the political philosophical question or whatever, so I think that you're right that so it's never a question of, you know, among Neo-Athenians and Neo-Romans that it's these guys think this and these guys either this or that, and then there's this deep divide or whatever. It's usually more of a question of who puts emphasis on what, right? So it's more of a question of emphasis usually in the contemporary discourse anyway. But nevertheless, I mean, I think there's a point to making the analytic distinctions in the debate. Why? Because then that helps you to see the internal the internal tensions of these theories. So I think integration makes sense, but not without. So I really do think that you have to disentangle the issues themselves to understand what you're doing. That's one thing. The other thing is okay, so I totally agree that some sort of integration is inevitable, because otherwise, anyway, that's my view, republicanism will technically be just another form of liberalism. So you need a little some neo-Athenian element into your republican theory if you want it to be unique and distinguishable from liberalism. But on the one hand, I'm not sure you need freedom for that. So I think this is that's I mean, if you're writing a normative paper, then I'm not sure you need to include this stuff in your analyses. And the other thing is, I don't think you should be afraid of populism. So you're discarding populism is like, that's like a bad thing. But I mean, I think if you really want a genuinely, you know, Republican position, then you probably shouldn't do that. And I think that John McCormick is on the right track there, because, you know, he sees that, yeah, I mean, if you really want to be special, then if you really want to be a Republican, then you got to be a little bit, you got to be populistic to a degree. I mean, maybe that's wrong, I don't know. But if you want to have a distinguishable position, then I don't think that you should, you know, be that hostile to the populistic position. I mean, yeah, of course, being distinguishable from liberalism at any price is not a good idea. But, you know, this is something I think you have to, you know, decide. Yeah.
Right, on first one, the disentanglement, I'm not really sure I got you right. So I proposed that we will talk about that like privately after the conference.
Right.
And okay. I only refer to the second question. I think I got right, the populist moment. Well, here I think that the Neo-Athenian authors themselves would like to make this distinction. If you take a look at work of Hannah Arendt and Michael Sandel, then we see that Hannah Arendt is somewhat skeptical to really like mass society, and in Michael Sandel's sense, he explicitly sort of states that he does not follow Rousseau in his account. Like the Republican hero for him is Tocqueville, right, and not Rousseau. And he himself thinks that such a Rousseauian version, in a sort of like a nasty interpretation, populist interpretation of him, would be bad. So he says that this is not the way I would like to articulate my republicanism. Right, it's more similar to Tocqueville, and if someone else, then probably to Hegel. Aristotle, right? Yeah, that I just wanted to mention.
Okay, yeah, thank you.
Okay, we have something more than 10 minutes left. I think I saw Alan raising his hand. So if you have a question, Alan, you're welcome to ask.
Yeah, just briefly on this question of the distinction or difference perhaps between neo-Roman and republicanism and liberalism. I just think, certainly in my view, they're kindred philosophies for sure, and they've got the same sort of ingredients. They value liberty, they value equality, they value, you know, a lot of these things, rights, justice, legitimacy. The neo-Roman view, as I understand it, has a particular sort of internal logic in which freedom is a kind of hybrid concept. It's not reducible to negative and positive. Liberty, it's a sort of function of equality, rule of law. You know, this idea of virtue, which is probably old-fashioned sounding, but it's certain sort of things like public reason, for example, we might use today. And these things have a kind of intricate relationship. They exist in a sort of balanced harmony. And I think for liberals, the relationship is looser. You know, in Isaiah Berlin's view, you know, equality is equality, liberty is liberty. These things shouldn't be confused. So I think the internal organization is distinct, even if the policies they support, the outcome and how they look, whether they can march together against certain sort of evils. I think that's all very, very similar. That's all. I think it's the philosophical logic rather than the political applications. That's all I have to say.
Yeah. Okay. So we have something more than 10 minutes left. I see we have two questions. I saw Nikolai was raising his hand, and then Jan Buran was asking. So Nikolai, please, you're welcome.
Yeah, it's just to give my 50 cents in this discussion also, and you may disagree with this, but I think I agree very much with what Alan just said. But I would also say that, for me at least, it seems like Republicans have a tendency to emphasize participation much more, or at least have a different conception of participation than do liberals. And I think for me, at least, this is the key question and the key difference. So liberals, as far as I see it, have a very minimal conception of political participation as something that contributes to freedom and to a good society. And what let's say neo-Roman or what republicanism really contributes is to put emphasis on participation. And then of course the question is like Szilard also said himself, you know, then what is participation, or what form of participation? And there we can find many answers, but I think it's some form of participation that goes beyond election every 4th year and then have your natural or your social rights secured. I mean, and if I were to be very harsh on the liberal tradition, I would say they don't care about participation. It's not a part of freedom. I mean, if you have secured your human rights, then fine. And then you have elections to ensure some sort of check on the political system. And I think participation is not very high valued in the liberal tradition. I mean, you can of course find liberals that will say something about participation, but I think participation, political participation as integral or intricate to freedom is not really an essential part of the liberal tradition. And that's where I would say that the Republican tradition has something very different to offer. But I would also like to hear your thoughts on this, just a reflection.
Can I respond to that?
Okay, sorry, and I didn't hear to whom this question was addressed.
It was not really it was just, you know, part of the discussion, and I would.
Okay, so it was a rather a comment. Okay, so maybe if anyone is interested in answering the question, I saw Szilard. Anyone else? Yeah. Okay, so Szilard, but please, because we are quite, we start to running out of time, so please make your reply.
Okay. Two things. I mean, if I mean, that's what my presentation was about. I mean, yeah, I'm aware of this commonplace, you know, that Republicanism allegedly puts greater emphasis on participation and everything. But I mean, if you look at the specifics, what Republicans are saying, and if you look at how they value participation, how much they want from it, how far they are willing to take the principle, how whether they want to coerce it or not, how perfectionist they want to make, you know, how strict they want to be about virtue and everything, then what you find is that what neo-Roman authors are saying, you know, contemporary neo-Roman authors, followers of Petit or whatever, is practically not different from what liberals are saying. I mean, yeah, I mean, sure, there's truth in what you say that historically, you know, liberals have not put great emphasis on participation, but that's also true about the Republican tradition, for one part. And on the other hand, what you're also saying that yeah, I mean, as long as you have your rights secured, there's nothing wrong. Well, I mean, okay, I think that it's not really a good idea to equate liberalism with just a conception of freedom. I mean, you know, Petit's books are often structured in this way that it looks like I'm only arguing with a freedom theory, but in actuality, I'm really arguing against liberalism as a whole. And liberalism is so much more than just a freedom principle. So I don't think it's true at all, you know, that you know, it just wants to secure your rights and that's it. I mean, you know, the equality principle, autonomy principle. There's so many other normative resources that liberals can rely on. You know, when it comes to this stuff of participation. So I disagree. Yeah.
Okay. So we are really running out of almost running out of time, and I see there are several hands being raised. But there was a question a couple of minutes ago raised by Jan Buran. So please make your question quick, and also we'd be very happy if the answer could be also very short and quick.
I just wanted to follow my discussion with Dr. Todd, so I can just write him a private message and let someone else ask. Yeah.
Okay. So if I mean, it's because it seems that we are still you know, going around the same question and the same topic. So maybe if there is a question about the topics that we have not touched, or the moment in the discussion that we haven't touched so far, So because it seems like we don't have much time, so it's no. I don't see anyone raising his hand.
Tomáš Halamka, I suppose. I'm sorry.
Okay. Yes. So okay. Yeah. Thank you. And Evangelos.
Sorry, he was telling me he's got some problems with connection.
Okay. So,
can you hear me? Because it's.
Yeah.
I think we can hear you.
We can see you.
We can't see you. But
you can just speak.
So if you don't have a problem with your connection, so please make your question, and then it will be we have the time for Evangelos' question. Okay. So Tomáš,
I had only.
Sorry, I just want to make a comment on this discussion concerning liberalism and republicanism.
Okay, but okay. So if you can make your Evangelos, if you can make your comment quick, and then we will ask Tomáš because.
Yeah, it's very short. I was just wondering concerning this. Concerning this similarity between liberalism and contemporary republicanism. And I was wondering if those who are engaged in the theoretical treatment of republicanism in contemporary philosophy have thought about what is about the reason of this similarity, because it seems to me that historically Republicans have not supported political positions identical to those of those that we call liberals. And I was wondering whether perhaps a reason could be that for contemporary Republicans, and especially Quentin Skinner, even though they endorse and propagate this Republican conception of liberty, they do not do the same with the concomitant concepts that Republican theorists that they study espouse. For example, they do not endorse a Republican conception of representation or a Republican conception of the state. And Skinner is explicitly advocating a Hobbesian definition of what the state is. And I'm wondering, is this perhaps the reason for which they tend to adopt political positions that are not similar or as demanding as those of historical agents that we describe as Republicans?
Okay, thank you. And I think, Tomáš, can you hear me?
Thank you, I can. I was only able to hear about half of what you said in the last 2 minutes, but hopefully it will improve. I would like to come back to Nikolai and his participation notion, and I'm pretty much with him on this one. And I think even some neo-Romans are. For example, Philip Pettit, so he himself experienced this thing they had in Canberra with local politics, and it seems to me he's very much in favor for participation in as many spheres or realms or levels as possible. And I think he's not in any sense I'm aware of contradicting the Sandel's notion of multiply situated selves, meaning that people in a Republican regime should be able to participate locally in single issues, in national level, in European level, in global level. So I think Philip Pettit is supporting this sort of encouragement of participation in a similar way as Michael Sandel does. And if I'm not wrong, he also mentioned in principle once a question of compulsory elections, which I think he didn't go into it. Perhaps Jan Buran, do you know if he supports that? But it seems to me that he at least plays with the idea.
Okay. So I didn't hear who was supposed.
That was for Jan Buran, that he might perhaps know this better than me.
Excuse me, what was the question? Can you repeat?
If Philip Pettit agrees with a compulsory election.
Oh, I think he does. Yeah, he has. I have written some articles of his in which he said.
Thank you.
Okay. I see no question, and we are really running out of our time. So now it's time for me to thank all the presenters and thank you all for your questions. They were all thought-provoking. So thank you very much. And let me remind you that we still have 2 more panels today. Now we are going to have a break for about 1 hour. So we will meet again in 12:30 Prague time, Central European time, with the panel on Republicanism as a matter of political philosophy. So hope to see you all in 1 hour again. And of course, you are all invited to continue in your discussions privately and so on. So thank you very much, and see you in 1 hour.
Thank you. Bye.
Okay, thank you everyone. Thank you, Jan, for presenting. Thank you for this vivid discussion. Well, I was astonished because from time to time I didn't even manage to observe who all wanted to speak, which was great. And well, as Jan suggested, we have almost 1 hour lunch break, so please relax. I'm going to get some glass of Czech beer to make you envy. And as we have already heard, because well, I would like to invite you, especially for the 5th panel, because as you can see, we have been almost silent about the French republicanism so far. And if you are looking forward to the French republicanism, please come at well 12:30, because the French papers will totally colonize the panel republicanism as a matter of political philosophy. So see you.